Yes. Yeah. And every 2 months we'll be sitting at the Seder. That's good. Okay. Okay. I just want to talk about a little bit of a technicality here that is associated with the calendar. And how do I say this nicely? In the times of the temple, it was very hard to prepare in advance for, let's say, Passover, because the the new Passover is dependent on people seeing the new moon, but not just seeing the new moon, but actually going to the court and testifying and saying, we saw the new moon. So you don't know that until that month. So when you get to pass, when you get to 2 weeks before Passover, that's the earliest that you could know what day Passover will be. In other words, it's a question of 2 days, but there's a lot of but there's a built-in uncertainty to the actual day. Today we don't have that. Today we have a set calendar because we don't have a Supreme Court, and there was no one cent. Even after the Supreme Court in Israel, there was a central court. We don't have a central court, so they did the math and they figured out how to create the calendar. It's not that complicated. Maimonides has the laws of sanctification of the new moon in his book. And he says, I learn it every year. I don't understand it. I'm sorry. I'm not great at math. But Maimonides says every school child could know this in 2, 3 days. Okay. So it's not that complicated. You can figure it out, the exact mathematics of when the new month is going to appear. Because it's not that complicated. But in biblical times, the point is not we know when the new moon is going to appear, but that does not make it the day. What makes it the day is the people seeing it, going to the court and the court pronouncing it holy. So why is that so important? And what is the symbolism of that? Doesn't seem convenient, right? You can't plan your Seder. Imagine you invite someone and say, come to my Seder. When's your Seder? Oh, I'm not sure. Maybe Tuesday night, maybe Wednesday night. When are you going to know? Oh, I'll know 2 weeks early, right? It's just not an efficient system. And even it depends where you live in Israel. If you live far away from Jerusalem, then it takes time to the message of when the first day of the month is to travel. And then you may find out 2 days before what day Passover is. So it's hands-on. People are involved, but it's not efficient. It's not efficient. You don't know. You can't prepare. So one way to think about this is that when you think about a Shabbat or holiday, is there's a very big difference between Shabbat and holiday, and that is as follows: when it comes to Shabbat, the person doesn't have to do anything. We know there's 6 days of the week, seventh day Shabbat, but there's no mitzvah to count 6 days, right? It's set by God. In other words, the days of the week, God created the world in 6 days, and the seventh day He rested. So there's nothing we do to make Shabbat holy. In the language of the Talmud, Shabbat mikadsha v'kaima. Shabbat is holy on its own. You don't need human involvement. My job is to rest, to tune in to the holiness of Shabbat. But it's not like I am creating the holiness of Shabbat. And that's why, if you look at the liturgy on Shabbat, both at when you talk about the Kiddush, when you sanctify the Shabbat over a cup of wine, or in the prayer, what do you say? The liturgy is Mekadesh HaShabbat, Baruch Atah Hashem, blessed are you, Lord, Mekadesh HaShabbat, who sanctifies Shabbat. Who sanctifies Shabbat? Not God. It's not the people, it's God. Now you have a completely different story when it comes to holidays. When it comes to holidays, the holidays are introduced later in the book of Numbers, chapter 28. He says, these are the holidays of the Lord, Asher Tikru Otam, which you will proclaim in their appointed times. The different story. People are the ones who make it holy. How do we make it holy? Because if we determine what day, when day, one day one of the month is, then automatically all the holidays are based on the moon. So when we declare what Rosh Chodesh is, when the first of the month is, automatically we say when is Pesach, when is Rosh Hashanah, etc., etc. So the holidays are declared by people, not by God. Now, if you look at the liturgy, it's also in the liturgy. If you look at both Kiddush of the holidays and the prayer of the holidays, it says, Baruch Atah Hashem, blessed are you, Lord, Mekadesh Yisrael v'hazmanim. God sanctifies Israel, meaning the Jewish people, and the times. What does that mean? God doesn't sanctify the holidays. God sanctifies the Jews, who in turn sanctify the holidays. So Shabbat is sanctified directly by God. Holidays are sanctified by people. And the idea is, and this is a very important component, because when we talk about a holiday, what's a holiday? So the Hebrew word for holiday is moed. What is Moed? There's different words. It's Chag. Chag is the more famous one. We discussed Chag in the beginning of this parsha where it said Chag. Chag means a circle. We're not going to get into that. But another name for the holiday is Moed. What is Moed? Moed has two meanings. It means a specific time, but it also means a meeting. Ohel Moed is the tent of meeting. So Moed is a time to meet God. All week you're busy. Shabbat is a different story. We'll talk about Shabbat in a second. But holiday is you have an appointed time. You put a time in your calendar. You say, okay, I'm going to meet God today. That's what a holiday is. Now, let's say you have a couple and you want to decide we want to go on a date. Who decides when we should go on the date? Who decides? So if it's just one party all the time, then it's not a balanced relationship. This guy makes all the decisions. She makes all the decisions. He makes all the decisions. It's not a healthy relationship. There has to be involvement of both parties. Sometimes he says, let's set a time. And sometimes she says, let's set a time, right? You have to have both. Otherwise, if it's like parents and young children, the parents do everything. But in a healthy relationship, it's both ways. Both people take the initiative. Who should take the initiative? I always say, I get into a fight, no problem. I'm happy to apologize, but I want you to apologize first. It doesn't work that way. Sometimes I have to apologize first. Sometimes you have to. It has to be balanced. You can't expect one person to make all the decisions because it's just not, that's not a mature relationship. So in the relationship between God and the Jewish people, there has to be, that's why I said it has to be hands-on. And hands-on is messy because if the Jewish people have to declare the holidays, then it's not dependent from when God created the world. It's not dependent on the math of the cycle of the moon. We can figure out the math. That's not very hard, but that's not what makes it holy. What makes it holy is the human involvement, because the whole point is God wants to say, I want to go on a date when you want me to come. Shabbat is when God wants. Very nice. Friday, you're in a rush. God wants you on a date. You have to stop what you're doing. Okay. But God says, holidays, I'm not deciding when the holiday is. You tell me when to come. And if not, I'm not coming. Right? So that's why the idea that you have that it has to be seen by the people and declared by the people, even though there are some inconveniences. But it's not set in stone. Set in stone means God set it up this way. No. When is the holiday? When is the meeting with God? When the people want it. That's a whole different story. And then, okay, that's the whole different story. We'll take Vicky's question and maybe add a little detail, and then we continue. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Thank you, Rabbi. I had a question which is kind of related, but kind of not, because tonight is Tu B'Shvat. I was just wondering if that's a biblical holiday.
Tu B'Shvat is not a biblical holiday. Tu B'Shvat is 15th of Shvat. And if you open up the Mishnah, it starts with the Mishnah, the sages, and they basically there's, we spoke about this last time, that the Jews have 2 new years. We have the new year of Rosh Hashanah for the year, for people, but also for the years. We count years from Rosh Hashanah. Then we have New Year of Nisan, which is we count months, because we say Nisan is the first month. So we have 2 ways of counting New Years, but really there's 4 ways. The Mishnah says there's Arba Rosh Hashanim Haim, there are 4 New Years. And Tu B'Shvat is considered New Year's for the tree. Without getting too technical, you have to make a differentiation when is a new year, even for vegetation. Why is that? So the halachic reason is because in biblical Israel, you have to give tithings. Every year, you have to give tithings of the produce. Now, what type of tithings do you have to give? It depends on the year. Some years you give to the poor. Some years you give to the Levite. Some years you don't have to give anything because you're not supposed to plant, and it's a sabbatical every 7 years. No, anyone can come take the fruit. So the question is, if I have a fruit that grows in a certain period, is it considered last year's or this year? When is the cutoff point? When is the cutoff point? So they had to figure out. So there's cutoff point for vegetation, for vegetables, and there's cutoff point for animals, because in the Torah also says that in biblical times they would tithe 10% of the animals born in your flock. And it was a tithing that you would have to take those animals and eat them in Jerusalem. You wouldn't give them to the priest, but they're holy. You have to eat them in Jerusalem. So too, what is the year? And you tithe all the ones, you have to tithe them by year. So the Mishnah gives you 4 periods of New Year's, and every New Year is for a different thing. So New Year's for Rosh Hashanah, the famous one is for people, and we believe the judgment for people is then. But there's all different New Years. And for the trees, when to tithe the produce, it's the 15th of Shvat. There's a disagreement. Shammai says it's the 1st of Shvat. Hillel says it's the 15th of Shvat. But without getting into too much of the details, the point is, by that time, the question is, by that time you say it's the new year because the trees, even though they didn't really blossom yet, even in the land of Israel, some trees begin to blossom after Tu B'Shvat. Let's say the almond, I don't know if you can call it a fruit, but the almond blossoms pretty early, right after Tu B'Shvat. But the point is that the rain from the winter, we say it had enough time to be absorbed in the roots, and it's already preparing for the blossoming of the new year. So that's the cutoff point. Now, why do we make a celebration? Why do we commemorate it? So then you get to more mystical interpretations, and that's why a lot of the Tu B'Shvat celebrations started because as a result of the Sephardic communities and Kabbalistic communities that focus on this idea, because according to the Torah, because it goes back to the Torah says man is like a fruit of the tree. So there's a lot of similarities between a human being and a tree. So we want to take lessons. But at the origin, when you open up the Mishnah, it was much more technical, right? When am I going to tithe my orange, as last year or as this year? And the ramification is who gets the 10%. But even that depends on the new moon, because it's related to the 15th of Shvat. So then you have to figure out what the new moon is. But the point here is, in a relationship, it's not that God is the one who's active and we're just passive, we just follow his commandments. There's many areas where you see that God is waiting for us to take the initiative. And we have to declare when the holiday is. Very important ideas. When's Rosh Hashanah? When's Yom Kippur? These are important questions, right? The most important commandments of the Torah really are dependent and set by people. And the symbolism is because it's more of a partnership. We don't look at our relationship with God necessarily. There's different dimensions, of course. On Rosh Hashanah, we say Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King. We're like subjects to God. We're like children, but we're also like partners or like spouses. And if you have a relationship with spouses, cannot be that one person is the dominant one and makes all decisions, and decides what time supper is going to be, and decides when we're going on a date, and we're going to go on the cruise, and we're going to go on vacation, because then the other person is not involved. So both parties have to be involved, and that's what the holidays represent.
And Tu B'Shvat is another point, because that's the holiday that wasn't even in a written Torah. It was instituted by people.
In general, the rabbinic holidays are even more that we show that we're looking to add. We're looking to beautify the relationship. In a relationship, if you say, I'm a very good spouse, I do what I'm supposed to do, I fulfill my obligation, I pay the rent, I whatever I do, whatever people do, then you do something, you go beyond what you have to do. Oh, we go buy flowers. Flowers cost a lot of money. Flowers is a few dollars. In Greenwich, it's expensive. But in other places, flowers are not that expensive. Comparison to doing what you're supposed to do, it's insignificant. But the point that you're doing beyond the letter of the law, beyond the obligation, that shows that the relationship is important to you. So all the rabbinic mitzvot and all the idea that we beautify the mitzvah, which actually comes from last week's parsha we read yesterday, in the Song of the Sea, we say, Zeh Eli v'Anvehu, this is my God. And there's different interpretations of what Anvehu means, but the common interpretation is Anvehu, I will beautify him. And the Talmud says, Hitna'eh lefanav b'mitzvot. When you do a mitzvah, what does it mean beautify God? How do you make God beautiful? You buy him a tie. What do you do for God? So when you do a mitzvah, make the mitzvah beautiful. If you're going to feed the poor, feed him of the best food. If you're going to build a temple, a synagogue, make it the nicest home in town. If you're going to, whatever you're going to do, that's the examples that the Talmud brings. People say, why are we renovating the shul? I'm sitting in a beautiful shul. I happen to love the shul, but Chabad's doing a renovation. Say, is it necessary? Is it luxury? Look, I don't know. I'm not in the real estate arm of Chabad of Greenwich, but according to the letter of the law, if you're living in a town that has beautiful homes, the shul has to be more beautiful than all the most beautiful homes in town. So if you're living out in Montana, you can get away with the barn as a shul. But if you're living in downtown Greenwich, I don't know, you have to make the most beautiful home in town. It has to be a shul. I didn't make this up. That's in the Talmud. But the point here is that Vanvev, you have to make it beautiful. If you care about it, if it's meaningful, it's not about I'm doing my obligation, I'm doing more. And that's the rabbinic laws and the customs. They're not obligation, but the Jewish people do out of love to Hashem. Go ahead, Dr. Bob, please.
Good morning, Rabbi. If if God is timeless and Jewish history is somewhat circular anyway, why is there such an obsession and emphasis on time and calendar?
So I would say like this. On one hand, God is infinite, but on the other hand, everything in halacha, in Jewish law, not just the calendar, but the calendar as well, everything in the halacha and the Jewish law is actually very, very technical. Things have to be done in this specific way in this specific time. I remember, I don't know why they did this, but they tried to they tried to do promotion. Chabad tried to do print promotions for the mitzvot to get people involved in mitzvot. So awareness. So they had a brochure, probably printed 30 years ago. They made a brochure about the mezuzah. And the mezuzah is a very small scroll. It's a scroll. How many lines is in the mezuzah? I would say 12, 13. I don't even know, 15 lines. And the tagline on this brochure is, this mezuzah, there are 1,200 laws of how to make the mezuzah, right? Every letter has to be precise. And I don't know why they would advertise that point. But the reality is every mitzvah has to be a specific time, a specific place, exactly in this way, not in the other way. And Bob says, I don't understand. God is infinite. You can connect to God any way. Why the technicality and why the regulation of every detail? And why, if you want to have a meeting with God, why do you have to wait till after sunset or after nightfall, right? The problem is that in some years, depending on the calendar, people have their Seder a little too early because they call dinner for 5:00. They eat the Seder. They finish the matzah before it's Passover. So it's a beautiful thing that you get together with family, but it's not the mitzvah. You have to eat the matzah after nightfall. So when I give people matzah, I say, when I give people matzah, hi Nat. When I give people matzah, I say, this is your matzah. Make sure you eat it for dessert, because you have to eat it at night. So, right, to say, this is the dessert matzah. Dessert, and later we'll look for some dessert. So the point is what? So I'm just making your question greater, right? So it's not just about the calendar; it's really about everything. And there are different interpretations. There are different ways of thinking about it. At least two ways of thinking about it. But I'll say one: the purpose of Judaism is to bring the infinite into the finite, and into the finite means in a very specific way, in a very specific time. So it's not just the time, it's everything has to be done in a specific way, because the whole point is, could you connect the infinite and the finite? So that's one philosophy. And there's another point, which is, let's leave it at that. That's the one point. The point is, it's not the escape. We're not trying to escape time. We're trying to infuse the infinite into a specific time. So everything has to be done in a very specific way, in a very specific place. It's all limitation. But why limitation? We're trying to transcend. We're not really trying to transcend. We're trying to bring down. In Kabbalah, everything is either going upward or going downward. Hala, which means elevation, or hamshacha means drawing down. And what we're really trying to do is draw down. Draw down means to bring it into very specific times and very specific place. And that's what everything is regulated, and everything is a specific time. I always tell the story. You probably heard it from me, but it was a funny story. I thought it was funny. And that's funny. I just realized how strange of a culture we are. So my daughter Dvorley was born on Pesach, on Friday on Pesach. And Chani did not want to be in the hospital on Pesach. So the doctor said, okay, you know what? You don't have to stay till Sunday morning because we can't leave on Shabbos. Okay, Saturday night you can leave. Fine. So he made all the arrangements. He left, but he made all the arrangements in Greenwich Hospital that released us on Saturday night, which they never release people at night, but they made this exception. So it's Saturday night, Saturday toward the evening, and someone asks me, one of the nurses, I'm standing in front of the nurse's station, and they say, what time are you leaving? And I say 8:47. And all of a sudden it's quiet and everyone looks at me. And I realize I said something wrong. And I don't know what I said wrong. I'm trying to replay this conversation. Why does everyone think I'm crazy? And then I realized most people don't say they're leaving at 8:47. But we leave at 8:47 because Shabbos is over at 8:47. So everything is a start time, is an end time. 8:47, that's when you leave. Normal people don't behave this way. But that's the way Judaism is. We have this holiness and a moment of transcendence. But it's not whenever you're in the mood. There's a starting point. There's an ending point. It's very grounded. It's very specific. Because it's not just transcending, it's drawing down. So that's the spiel. That's the short answer.
But what's interesting about this, it's not like the Torah gives you 613 commandments and says, by the way, please do this in a timely order. One of the first commandments is build a calendar, figure out the timing.
Yeah.
And by the way, here's the rest of the 612 commandments.
Right. So the first commandment is time. The
Yeah.
first commandment is time. And the reason for that is because time is the most general thing we have. In other words, if you think about it, every mitzvah is about bringing holiness to a specific part of the world or a specific part of the body, right? When you're going to shul, it's your feet. When you're putting on tefillin, it's your hands. If you're going lighting Shabbos candles, it's your hands. Every mitzvah is related to a different part of the body, a different part of the world. In fact, they say there's 248 positive commandments, and the Talmud says that that's supposed to commemorate the 248 limbs that a person has. Now, you say, I went to medical school and I didn't learn that there's 248 limbs. Maybe there's more, maybe there's less. The point is that that's all just a question of classification. But in Talmudic sense, every mitzvah is related to one limb. So every mitzvah is supposed to bring holiness to part of the world or part of the person. So what's the most general thing in the world? All of the creation is within time and space, but even space is after time. Time is the first creation. First creation is time. Before time, there's nothing that we could comprehend, and universe is impossible without time. So the first thing you do, if the purpose of collectively the Torah is to bring holiness to reality, to all of reality, then the first step, the most general thing, is the time. And that's the Hasidic interpretation, why the first mitzvah, you have mitzvot in the Torah, earlier be fruitful and multiply, and circumcision, that's the book of Genesis, but that's not to the collective Jewish people. To the collective Jewish people, the first mitzvah is not this week's parsha that we're reading, the 10 Commandments, even though that's very important. The first mitzvah is the calendar, because if you have to bring sanctity and holiness, the first place to start, the most general thing you could start from is time. So that's the interpretation about time. Go ahead, Steve. Yes. Yeah. Ramach Evarim. They call it Evarim. I think Evarim is limbs. I think. And then 365 sinews. It depends how you classify a limb. That's what I'm saying. That's classification. That doesn't. You can't ask me that. Yeah. It depends what you mean by a limb. By a limb means a body part. Now, what's a body part? You can call it every cell. Then you have trillions, right? So it depends how you classify. So I'm not an expert. I slept through the biology class, but at least from the perspective of the Talmud, if they're making that connection, is that they're making a connection between every mitzvah and every part of the body. And the point is that the purpose of the Torah, again, is to sanctify the world, sanctify the person. And the first place to start, or the most general place you could start with, is time, because everything we have is within time.
May I ask you?
Yes, of course. Yes. Yes, yes.
So, correct me if I'm wrong. We were supposed to leave the corners.
Correct. Peah. Yeah.
So in doing so, if somebody, how would somebody know if a tree was 3 years old? If they were visiting our field, did the owner of the field mark the tree in such a way so somebody would know would be prohibited to say?
So that's a good question. So what Steve is saying is all different types of tithings and all different types of gifts to the poor, or I guess poor. And one of them is called peah. Peah would mean you have to leave a corner of your field for the poor. And there are many other gifts as well, but that's one of them. So Steve is saying what happens is a separate commandment that we're not supposed to eat the fruit of the tree for the first 3 years. So how do I know if I'm coming to collect? How do I know if it's the first 3 years in which nobody's allowed to partake of the fruit? So I think the answer would be is that you cannot collect of the corner of the fruit until the owner harvests the field, right? If the field is full, you're not allowed to take the corner. When they take the corner, they harvest the whole field. It's the final corner, so to speak. So only when I see that whatever it is, 90, there's no exact measure. So it's 98%, 97%, whatever the percentage is of the field has been harvested. And then the corner of the field has been left to the poor. The corner of the field has been left, then I could assume that it was for the poor, and then I could take it. But the arla, the fruit of the trees, I wouldn't do that. The owner either would let it rot, but either way, even if he harvested, he would harvest the whole field. That's what I would think.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, one more thing going back to, I hate to draw out this point, but today, this is an interesting idea that I read years and years ago from Rabbi Shamshon Raphael Hirsch, and he says like this. He says that we all know that in Israel there's one day of the holidays, like in the Torah. There's one day of the holiday. Passover is 7 days. The first day is holy, you don't do labor. The last day is holy, you don't do labor. Outside of Israel, it's the first 2 days we don't do labor. Last 2 days we don't do labor. We have 2 seders. And why does that happen? So you may or may not know. The reason is because when they still sanctify the moon based on sighting the moon. So if you were living in Israel, you got the news when the new month is, and then you can figure out when the holidays are, and you know what the holiday is. But what happens if you lived in diaspora? What happens if you lived in Babylonia? And you wouldn't know. There wasn't enough time for the messengers to travel from Israel to the rest of the diaspora. So by the time the 15th day of the month comes, you have no idea, is tonight the 15th day or is tomorrow the 15th day? So you don't know. So because you're in doubt, you make 2 days. And that's why the diaspora has 2 days of all the holidays. Every holiday, whenever Torah says rest from work, we double it. And we have 2 seders, and we all. Now, the problem is that now we already know because we went back to sanctifying it based on the calendar, not based on the calculation, not based on sighting of the moon. So why don't we go back? I'm sorry? We don't wait for messages anymore. So why do we do it? So the answer is minhag Avosenu b'yadenu. The custom of our ancestors we keep the tradition of our ancestors. There really is no reason because and diaspora they did 2 days, so we do 2 days. So a lot of people do the second day and they feel like it's like no point. It's like we're doing a ritual and it's a big investment. You're not going to work. You're taking off of work, and it's a big investment to keep the second days. Even though if you look at the history, it was only here because of doubt. Now we don't have that doubt. So a lot of people are a little bit resentful about the second day. Says Rabbi Shamshon Fall here, she says, listen, he says, in Israel, because they have the calendar now, so they're out of touch with this notion that the holidays has to have uncertainty built into it because the whole point is that the Jewish people are the ones who sanctify it. It turns out that we in the diaspora, we're maintaining a remembrance to the idea that we keep 2 days because we're not sure. Because it's uncertain, because in biblical times we did it based on the moon. And in a way, we're commemorating the idea that the holidays are more uncertain because you need human involvement. So in other words, we are closer to the original than the people of Israel, because the people of Israel now are doing it as a set date. And the whole point is it's not a set date, it depends on the people in biblical times. Now, for technical reasons, we can't do that because we don't have a Supreme Court. But in a way, in the diaspora, the fact that we keep 2 days is we are preserving the original intent, which is the uncertainty. And the uncertainty represents the fact that God doesn't set the holidays, the people do. And the people's involvement and the people's ability to sanctify time. Like Bob says, we're sanctifying time, but the most clear embodiment of the sanctification of time is the holidays. That we took a weekday really and made it holy because it's not sanctified by God directly. Shabbat is sanctified by God directly, but the holidays are sanctified indirectly through the people, through the Jewish people. So that is a little bit about the calendar. We could really be here forever, but the time is ticking, pun intended. So the calendar is ticking, so we have to maybe look at other things. So that's I reserve the right to go back to the calendar because in this class we move 2 steps ahead, 1 step backward, but it's all good. Okay, next point. So we talked about this. You may have talked about this last week. I'm trying to be very, very brief on this and go to my next point. So the God says it's 2 weeks before the Exodus. God says, first mitzvah, sanctify the new moon. Okay, very good. Now we know what day 1 is. And then God says, okay, now that you have a calendar, now we can talk about times. Okay, so on the 10th day, everybody should take a sheep or a goat and designate it as a Pesach offering. And on the 14th day, you offer it as a Pesach offering. And then you have all the laws of the Pesach offering. Now, of course, there's so much symbolism in everything, on every offering, but especially in the Pesach offering, because the Pesach offering is really, in a sense, the first offering in the Torah, the first offering in the Torah of the Jewish people. And this is also our birth as a people. We talk about this, that when are we born as a people? So there's different ways to think about it. Some people would say Sinai, some people would say, but really, Ezekiel says, in a way, the Exodus is the moment of birth, because till then we were sort of swallowed up within the Egyptian culture, and then we're born at the Exodus. There's a expression in the book of Deuteronomy where Moses says, "Is there any God that did for the people, what God did for you, Lavo, who came and took you as a nation from amidst the nation. So we were a nation, but we're swallowed up within another nation. And in a way, that's like a metaphor for the child in the womb. Because on one hand, we talked about this on Friday a little bit, the child in the womb on one hand is its own person, but on the other hand, it's part of somebody else, right? So you're a nation within a nation. And then in a way, the Exodus is when we become our own people. We went into Egypt as a family. We weren't a family. We become a nation in Egypt, but we're still swallowed and consumed within the greater greater culture. And in a way, we're born in Egypt. In a way, I hate to say this, Egypt is our mother. And I wanted to say something funny about that. In a way, let me explain what I mean. Many people in the culture, people refer to the nation, to the land, as parent, right? You say the motherland, you say the fatherland, you say patriotism, which means the love of country. But what's the etymology? What's the roots? Pater, father, right? So people, I'm a nation, I'm a Frenchman, I'm an Englishman, I'm a Russian, mother Russia. What's the mother? Because my mother is the land. The land is what gave birth to the people. Because how do nations form? Nations form because people living on a land. So because we're living on the same land, we create laws to be able to navigate how we're going to live on this land. And depending on where you live, that's going to depend on what type of laws you're going to create. But what gives birth to nationhood is the land. So the land, even in the culture, the way people speak, the land is the father, the land is the mother. That makes sense? Now, you cannot divorce your father or your mother. That's it. You are what you are. Now, when you look at the Jewish people, Israel is not our father, not our mother. That's not what it is. Where's our mother? If anything, mother is Egypt. What is Israel? Israel is certain, in the Torah, you don't see it so much, but in the prophets, you see it all the time. Israel is our spouse. Spouse is a different story. Spouse is a different relationship. You go into a covenant, and there could be separation. There could be divorce, separation. There could be remarriage. There could be exile. But that's not possible from a biological parent. The biological parent, you're stuck. There's nothing you can do. You can stand on your head. You're still related. So in other words, what makes us as a people is not the fact that we're living in Israel. For most of our history, we were not living in Israel. We were not formed in Israel. We were not dependent on Israel to be a people. What is it? What is Israel? Israel is the place where we find completion, right? And we're married to the land. But God says right away, if you're not going to keep the covenant, you'll be exiled. And then God will bring you back and renew the covenant. All the metaphors in the prophets is all about spouse, that you're going to be separated, you're going to be remarried. It's all a metaphor for marriage. That's why I say Israel is not our mother. In a way, Egypt is our mother. What does it mean Egypt's our mother? It means Egypt, in a way, is our natural disposition. But the idea of Judaism is to raise us above the nature and make us holy. Rabbi Friedman talked about this last night. Raising the child means raise the child to a higher level. You have the natural self, and then could you raise and elevate yourself and grow, right? So biological parenthood is Egypt. Where do we understand? Where did we learn about life? Where did we learn about when we form a people and we say, what is a people? What is a nation? We look to the superpower. We do the same thing. In Israel, we want to know what to do. We look at America. We used to look at Europe, now they look at America. The point is, you look at the superpower, and that's what forms your understanding of what nationhood is. And that's your biological, that's your natural disposition. But a spouse is a different story. Spouse, you have to go out and you have to seek the spouse, and you have to earn the right, earn the covenant, and live up to the covenant. And if you misbehave, they may send you out, and they may bring you back. It's already a whole different story. That's our relationship with the land of Israel. The point is, we were born in Egypt. I just said this parenthetically. I'm happy to take the questions. But my point was, so everything at our birth, the Passover offering, is critical to our understanding what our people is, because when God gives us this commandment, in a way, what he's saying is, this commandment is the first thing you're going to do as you're being born. So therefore, to understand what our mission as a people, or what's critical to us as a people, the Pesach offering is going to give us some of those hints, because the Pesach offering is really the time when we became a people. That's the point. Go ahead, Vicky, please. Doctor, you're next.
Thank you, Rabbi. My question is about that metaphor that Israel being a spouse. I know I heard that I may be mistaken that in the halacha you're not encouraged to marry the same spouse after you divorce.
No. And that it's actually a mitzvah. It's very interesting.
The
Person divorces a spouse, it's a mitzvah to remarry, unless if a person divorces a spouse and she remarries to somebody else, then you're not allowed to take her back. You got
So
the difference.
you
But if
are-
you divorce a woman, it's actually a mitzvah to remarry her. It's a mitzvah.
So to apply to that metaphor, if you assimilated in in the other country and kind of got married to that country, that's not encouraged. But if you still remain loyal to Judaism, it's a mitzvah.
Right. And there's all kinds of ways of thinking about it. One of the things that Isaiah says, that's what we read in one of the Haftorahs in the summer, that he says there's no really bill of divorce. Divorce is a very strong case. Before the divorce, the woman left the home. So Isaiah, the people say, God divorced us. We can do whatever you want. We're divorced. We don't have a covenant with God anymore. God threw us out of Israel. Now we're exiled to Babylonia. We'll serve idols. We'll do whatever we want. We don't have to serve God. There's no more marriage. So Isaiah says, it's very powerful words. He says, Ezu sefer kritutim chem asher shalachtia. Where is the bill of divorce of your mother that I sent her away? Meaning there's no bill of divorce. Just because the woman left the house doesn't mean there's a divorce. So in other words, we really were not divorced from the land. We were sent away, but we're not divorced. But the point is, you see what I'm saying? So you can get into the details about exactly how the metaphor plays down. But the point is, biologically, it doesn't work. Your mother is your mother. It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter. You know, I don't have to justify. If I'm born in a certain country, I'm American, I'm British, I'm French. This is who I am because I was born here. In Israel, it doesn't really work that way. It's my land because God gave it to me, not because I was born here. If God gave it to me, God gave it to me with a covenant. And you have to earn the covenant. And God says how many times in the Torah and how many times in the prophets, if you don't earn your right to be here, you're going to be sent away. It doesn't work that way. I don't have to justify being an American. I don't have to justify being a Brit. And I don't have to justify being Japanese. I am because that's the way I was born. It's a biological thing. But living in Israel, I know Zionism tries to say we're just like all the other nations. That's okay. I don't want to get political here, but if you're living in Israel, you have to be in touch with the covenant. We're here not because we deserve to be here. Rabbi Friedman talked about Shabbos. It's my birthright. It's inheritance, but inheritance it's a covenant. It's a covenant. And God Himself says, if you're not going to live up to the covenant, you're going to be sent away temporarily. You'll come back, of course, Mashiach comes. But the point is, it's a different relationship. My mother, I can always kvetch to my mother. She has no choice. She has to always accept me. My spouse, I don't know. You got to behave. You got to behave. You never know what can happen. You may have to sleep outside in the garage. It's too cold to sleep in the garage. But with a mother, it doesn't work that way. Parents, there's nothing I could do. Even if they're estranged, she's still your parent. So that's the metaphor. Go ahead, Dr. Tamarin.
Rabbi, if Egypt is our mother, is the assumption that our core identity is Egyptian, and that every morning when we wake up, in a way, we're Egyptian, and our challenge for the day is to elevate ourselves.
Yeah, I would just say it a little bit different. I would say that our natural instincts are Egyptian. And that's why in the book of Leviticus, which is the book of holiness, it keeps on saying, and do not do like the actions of the land of Egypt. Don't do like the actions of Canaan either. But the point is, we all have a natural side and a spiritual side. We have a godly soul and an animal soul. So the natural side is Egyptian. Why not? Why not? How many times do I have to say, don't do like the Egyptians did? What does that mean? If a Torah says, don't do like the Egyptians did, what does that mean? It means that if a Torah wouldn't tell me, what would I do? Exactly what the Egyptians did, right? If you tell me, don't do this, what does that mean? That I want to do that, right? If I wouldn't want to do that, you wouldn't have to tell me not to do it. So when the Torah says, be holy, it means have the holy part of you, express the holy part of you. But there's also a non-holy part of self, a natural part of self. And what's the natural part of self? At that time, the culture is Egyptian. Egypt is the superpower, not just the superpower militarily, but also culturally. By the way, we're Western people. We're Jewish, but we have Western values. And in a way, also the way we think about life is in some ways very influenced by Christianity. I could bring you some examples. And that's our natural instinct. And we have to push away and say, no, there's a holy spiritual side. What's an example? The example would be exactly what we're getting here too about the home being the center. That in in Christianity, for example, what's the holiest spot? The house of worship. And many Jews misunderstand this, and they say the holiest spot in Judaism is your temple, is your house of worship. But the reality is that's a superimposition by the foreign culture. For Judaism, the temple, the synagogue, the shul is not the most important place, not the most holy place. In fact, it didn't exist until 1,300 years after Judaism. What's the most important place is the home. And that's why, what about the Pesach offering? We're going to see right away. You have to be in the house and you have to stay in your house. And don't run away right after the Seder. You have to stay there till the morning, right? So when we think about religion, in many ways, we're thinking about Christianity, and then we say, "Oh, we're a little bit different than Christianity." No, it's a total different model. But the point here is that we can't, because we're living in a certain culture, we're influenced by that culture, whether we like it or not. If when we were born in Egypt, whether you like it or not, when you turn on the news, you're watching Egyptian news. When you read when you read literature, you're reading Egyptian literature. Culture is Egyptian. Now you say your job is you're your own people. Break away from your mother and become your own person. Elevate yourself. But I don't mean your mother as a bad person. I just mean that your mother is your natural state. But then you have to raise yourself. You have to become holy. You have to sanctify. That's what I would say.
So, Rabbi, what you're basically saying is that in Christianity, they often say people are intrinsically good. I don't know, maybe that's misreading. But in Judaism, what we're saying is people are intrinsically Egyptian, selfish, inconsiderate, etc. But that every day the challenge is to elevate ourselves, so that every day, in a way, if you slip back, you could slip back into being an Egyptian every day. And then
let me just and my understanding, I'm no expert. My understanding, certainly in Catholicism, and certainly the thesis of the original sin is that since the original sin, people are basically bad. Certainly in Catholicism, and you have to believe in a nice Jewish boy to be liberated, but to be saved. But if not, you're essentially bad. That's I think the doctrine, at least the common doctrine, certainly in Catholicism, but also probably also in other aspects. But I'm not an expert. So that's essentially that because of the sin, we're basically bad and we have to be saved. Judaism doesn't say that. We're not saying that we're basically bad. To the contrary, we say everybody is inherently good if you go deep enough. But we do say that basically we're saying there's a dichotomy. There's a part of self that is biological and that is self-oriented. And then there's the part of self that is godly and transcendent. And go back to the creation of Adam. What God describes that Adam was created earth, afar min adama, earth, dust from the earth. In other words, we have very physical properties. We want what all other biological creatures want, which is basically survival and pleasure. And that's part of us. But then we have a soul. And then there's a battle between the two. And that tension, I want to say battle, but that tension every single day exists. So I'm not going to say we're inherently evil. No, I'm going to say, I'm not saying we're inherently Egyptian, but I'm saying the natural part of self is inherently Egyptian. Egyptian would mean at that point what was Egyptian. Now you can call it to whatever you want to call it. But the point here is, and then we're called to allow for the deeper part of self and the soul and the holiness to express itself in our psyche and ultimately in our body as well. But I think that we're not saying that this should not mean that people are inherently bad. This should mean that inherently there is a conflict because we're a hybrid of two extremes. And the Kabbalah talks about this. When you read the description of of all animals, or all created beings, or all animals, the Torah just says God created living beings. They were created as living beings. What's the symbolism? That there's not such a gap between the body and the soul, because you have an animal. What does the animal? What does the body want? What does the soul? The spiritual side and the physical side are not that extremes. The human being, the way the Torah describes the creation, is we have afar, earth. Earth is the lowest form of life. It's not it's not something that grows. It's not plant, and it's not animal. It's earth. It's the lowest form. It's mineral. And then God blows into its nostrils a breath of life. The point here is that it's described as two extremes coming together. The animals, no, they come there in peace. The animal doesn't have inner tension. The animal wakes up in the morning, it does what it's supposed to do. There's no inner tension. The human being has inner tension because the human being is really a hybrid of two extremes. Now the question is, every moment, who's going to dominate within that person? The animals don't have that. That's why animals don't need therapy. You never see animals that need therapy. They're good people. They're good creations. They don't need therapy because they do what they do. It's not, they don't have conflict. They don't have opposites. They don't have opposite extremes. We're on one hand, we're worse than the animals. I've never seen an animal create a genocide. Animals, sometimes they prey on other animals. So that's for survival. I've never seen animals do a genocide, right? Human beings could be the lowest, but beings can also become the most altruistic. Animals could also be altruistic to a degree, but humans could be even more altruistic. So we are two extremes coming together. And then the question is, and that's that built-in tension that we deal with every moment. Yeah.
So in terms of Egypt, how do you square that philosophically with the establishment of Goshen and in our own culture?
So we try to maintain that. We tried to maintain when we came, Joseph says, let's stay in Egypt, and Jacob obviously wants them to be separate. But the history is that we didn't really stay in Goshen, and we did try to integrate, and that came at a cost, but also at a cultural cost, where the sages say that by the time the Exodus happens, both the Egyptians and the Jews are both serving idols, with the exception of the tribe of Levi. So in a way, we could talk about this too, that the taking of the Pesach offering was a rejection of idol worship. And that was critical because the sheep, they serve the lamb. They serve the lamb, they serve the goat, which is one of the constellations, Gedi, the goat. So the lamb, whatever they call it, goat or lamb. But the point is that Tala is a lamb. They serve the lamb. So the point is that one of the interpretations of what the significance of this Pesach offering is to slaughter it, take the blood, put it on the doorposts. What are we so obsessed here? What do we have to advertise about the blood? And God says, I'll see the blood and I'll know you're a Jewish home and I'll leap over. God doesn't need to see the blood to know you're a Jewish home. God should know that you're a Jewish home. But the point is, you have to do something to be worthy of the Exodus. And what you're doing is you're rejecting the idol worship, which was very common amongst the Jews. So yes, Joseph wanted the Jewish people to remain isolated and in their own quote unquote ghetto or Goshen or region. But Jews like to integrate. And that's not a bad thing. It's only a bad thing if you also integrate and assimilate your culture and your way of and your faith. And according to the tradition, the tradition, many people did. Most people did. And at the time of idol worship, and Ezekiel talks about this when he describes the birth. We say that the Haggadah at Aaron Ve'eria, you're naked, meaning we don't have any merits. You don't really have merits. Why did God take us out of Egypt? Because of the promise to the patriarchs, not because we were deserving, because culturally we were assimilated culturally, and we were idol worshippers. And the beginning of the change is Pesach offering, rejection of idol worship. But you're right, the plan was keep the Jews separate and let them maintain their own cultural autonomy. But over time, that eroded. Over 200 years, that eroded. Most people believe we were in Egypt for 210. 400, the Torah tells us the figure of 400, but it doesn't add up. The 400 figure is from the birth of Isaac, because God tells Abraham, your descendants are going to be foreigners and they're going to be enslaved for 400 years, but that starts with your descendants. But there was no 400 years from Jacob coming until the Exodus. That was about 210 years. But 210 years is enough time to.
We were enslaved for the
Yeah, right.
We did have yeshivas.
In the beginning. And at the end, you had Levi. The tribe of Levi, Maimonides talks about this, that Levi, the tribe of Levi maintained their teachings and maintained the culture, and they weren't enslaved. That's part of it, they weren't enslaved because they didn't try to assimilate. So they were separate. So they weren't easy to enslave because they always kept apart, right? But when the Jewish people integrated, and then we talked about this of how they enslaved the Jews. They said, well, all the Egyptians are going to build for Pharaoh. Let's all go build. And the Jews and the Egyptians all went to build. And then you want to be a good citizen, so you want to build, and you want to build enthusiastically. And then slowly but surely, the Egyptians stopped building, and they forced the Jews to continue. But that only works when to the people, most of the people who wanted to integrate. So that's the story in short. Okay, go ahead, Vicky. We may have the kids coming in, but we'll try our best.
Well, it's actually one question that addresses many issues that we discussed. I hope I hope you can give me more than I know already. So the best cure for not getting enslaved, for not getting assimilated in exile, for not getting uh, not getting over your evil inclination is to study Torah. That's the only remedy I know, unless you tell me something else. So if Jews were connected to their faith and to study Torah, they wouldn't have the desire to assimilate. If they come back to the land after being exposed to other cultures, they wouldn't bring the other cultures into the land because they will be connected to the source. They will be connected to the Torah. So what other than Torah study can keep Jewish spirit alive?
I think Torah is very powerful because the Torah affects your ideas and how you think about the world, and your philosophy is very powerful. But there's other things. There's community, there's mitzvot, there's good deeds, there's actions, there's all kinds of ways. But I believe that you're right, especially in the modern world. Once you get to enlightenment, when people are thinking about ideas, then the only way you're going to maintain your identity and the identity of your children is if they understand why they're doing it. It can't just be that we happen to be living together and this is our culture, so we have cultural Judaism. It's a factor, but it's less powerful. When you study and you learn and you understand and you internalize, that's usually, and in the modern world, more effective. But it's not the only way. I think community is very important. In America, a lot of people say they went to Jewish camps, sleepaway camps, and that's where they met other Jewish friends and maybe married somebody from there, right? So there are cultural ways to do this, but I think that you're right that a very deep way is through education. I think you're right about that.
Beautiful. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Okay, everyone should have a wonderful day, and we should meet each other in good health. And next week, there's a good chance that I'm going to have to cancel next week because they're having the conference of all the Chabad women emissaries from around the world. And so look out for an email. I'll send an email and we'll figure out if we're doing it next week. But either way, maybe in 2 weeks, but either way, it should be a little warmer. We'll be closer to Passover in 2 weeks from now than we are right now. And hopefully the weather will reflect it as well. Okay. Be well, everyone. Thank you. Steve, great to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you.